If you've spent any time in parenting conversations, online, in books, with other parents, you've heard some version of this debate. Be firm, set limits, hold the line, or be warm, be flexible, be the parent your kid actually wants to talk to. Most parents quietly pick a side, and most parenting content tells you one extreme or the other is right. Here's what the research actually says. Both extremes produce measurable, documented harm. The rigid parent and the permissive parent are running the same experiment with different variables, and child psychology has been tracking the outcomes for 60 years. The data doesn't favor strict, it doesn't favor cool. It identifies a third approach, one that most parents have never been given a name for, and the gap in outcomes between that approach and the two most common ones is not subtle. It shows up in academic performance, emotional regulation, and long-term resilience. Here's exactly what the science found, and what it means for how you parent starting today. If you're a parent who makes decisions based on data, not instinct, subscribe to the Parent Lab. This channel is built for you. In the 1960s, a developmental psychologist named Diana Baumrind began observing how parents actually behaved with their children. Not what they said they did, but what they actually did. She watched interactions, coded behaviors, and followed children over time. What she found wasn't a spectrum from strict to lenient. It was a two-dimensional map. One axis measured responsiveness, how much warmth, emotional availability, and support a parent offered. The other measured demandingness, how much structure, expectation, and accountability a parent enforced. When you cross those two dimensions, you don't get two parenting styles. You get four, and the outcomes attached to each one are so consistent across cultures, income levels, and family structures that they've been replicated in hundreds of studies across 6 decades. This is not a theory. This is one of the most robust findings in all of developmental psychology. The first style is authoritarian parenting, high demandingness, low responsiveness. This is the strict parent. Rules are non-negotiable. Obedience is expected without explanation. Warmth is either absent or conditional on compliance. The parent's authority is the reason. Because I said so is not a punchline here. It's the operating principle. On the surface, this approach produces compliant children. And in the short term, that compliance can look like success. Kids follow rules. They perform. They don't cause obvious problems. But the research on long-term outcomes tells a different story. Children raised in authoritarian households show significantly higher rates of anxiety and depression in adolescence. They demonstrate lower self-esteem, reduced intrinsic motivation, and a diminished ability to make independent decisions. Because they were never taught to reason through rules, only to follow them, they struggle when external authority disappears. In college, in relationships, in careers, the scaffolding falls away, and there's nothing underneath it. They also show a troubling pattern in peer relationships. They're more susceptible to peer pressure, not less. Because they were conditioned to comply with authority, they comply with whoever holds social power in the room. The strict parent, trying to protect their child from bad influences, may have inadvertently made them more vulnerable to exactly that. The second style is permissive parenting, high responsiveness, low demandingness. This is the cool parent, warm, emotionally available, attuned to the child's feelings. But boundaries are inconsistent or absent. Rules are negotiated endlessly. The parent prioritizes the relationship over the structure, and often mistakes a child's happiness in the moment for a child's well-being over time. Again, the short-term picture looks appealing. The child is expressive, confident, and emotionally connected to the parent. But the longitudinal data is sobering. Children raised permissively show significantly lower academic achievement, higher rates of impulsive behavior, and greater difficulty with frustration tolerance. They struggle in environments that require sustained effort without immediate reward, which describes most of adult life. They also show elevated rates of substance use in adolescence, not because they were exposed to more risk, but because they were never given the internal framework to evaluate and resist it. The permissive parent gave their child everything except the one thing that actually builds resilience: the experience of navigating limits. Discomfort, delayed gratification, and accountability are not punishments. They are the training ground for a functioning adult nervous system. Remove them entirely, and you don't get a happier child. You get a less equipped one. The third style, the one the data consistently identifies as producing the best outcomes, is called authoritative parenting. Not authoritarian, authoritative. The distinction matters enormously. Authoritative parenting is high on both dimensions simultaneously, high warmth and high structure. The parent is emotionally available and genuinely connected to the child, and they enforce clear, consistent expectations with explanations attached. Rules exist, and children are told why they exist. Consequences are predictable, not arbitrary. The parent's authority is real, but it's exercised through relationship, not fear. Children raised in authoritative households outperform their peers on nearly every measurable outcome. Higher academic achievement, better emotional regulation, stronger peer relationships, greater self-esteem, lower rates of anxiety, depression, and substance use, higher levels of intrinsic motivation, and critically, better decision-making when parents aren't present. Because they weren't just taught what to do, they were taught how to think. The mechanism behind this is not complicated. When a child understands the reasoning behind a rule, they internalize the principle, not just the behavior. When a parent enforces a boundary while remaining emotionally connected, the child learns that love and accountability are not opposites. That's the foundation of a regulated, resilient adult. The practical difference between these styles isn't about being harder or softer. It's about being intentional on both axes at once. An authoritarian parent says, "You're not going to that party. End of discussion." A permissive parent says, "Well, if it really means that much to you, I guess it's okay." An authoritative parent says, "Here's my concern about that situation. Let's talk through it, and then we'll make a decision together, but I'm making the final call." That last response is harder. It requires more of the parent. It demands emotional presence and the willingness to explain yourself while still holding the line. But it does something the other two approaches cannot. It teaches the child to engage with reasoning rather than simply react to authority or absence of it. It also builds the kind of relationship where a teenager actually tells you what's going on in their life, not because you're their friend, but because they trust that you'll respond with both honesty and care. The strict versus cool debate was never the right question. The right question is whether you're showing up with both warmth and structure, consistently, simultaneously, even when it's inconvenient. Most parents default to one or the other because doing both at once is genuinely difficult. It requires you to hold two things that feel like opposites: deep emotional connection and firm, non-negotiable expectations. But the science is unambiguous. Children don't need a parent who is their authority figure or their ally. They need a parent who is both. That combination, warmth plus structure, connection plus accountability, is not a parenting style. It's the architecture of a child who grows into a capable, grounded, emotionally healthy adult. The debate is over. The data has been in for decades. What you do with it starts now. This is the Parent Lab, where behavior is studied, not guessed.